They lived at the end of a dirt road, past the rotted barn and the silent woods that never quite let in the light. The mail never came. Neighbors didn't visit. And the house? It didn't have a number, just a sagging porch, a rusted wind chime that didn't sing anymore, and a feeling, something thick in the air. If you stood too long on that porch, something in your chest told you to turn around. But inside that house, the walls held a story. A woman who was both mother and aunt, sister and wife, and 7 children, born of her own brother. This isn't a legend. This isn't folklore whispered by drunk men around a campfire. This happened in America. And the records, though buried, altered, even denied, can still be found if you know where to look. Her name was Mary Alice H., but by the time social services found the family, nobody called her that anymore. The locals called her the Hollow Woman. Hollow because of her eyes, they said. Hollow because of what she let happen. But when you start peeling the story back, one quiet horror at a time, you begin to realize she didn't let anything happen. She was raised to believe there was no other way, that the bloodline had to remain intact. She was born in 1949, deep in rural Appalachia. Her parents were first cousins. Their parents were cousins too. By the time Mary Alice was 16, her mind was already warped by generations of genetic collapse and isolation. But it wasn't until she disappeared for 2 years, only to return with an infant in her arms, that anyone started asking questions. The man who got her pregnant? Her own brother, James. He was 20, she was 17, and that child was only the beginning. What you're about to hear isn't just a story of incest. It's a legacy of abandonment, of sickness passed down like heirlooms, of a world where no one came to help, because no one wanted to see. And the worst part. This story isn't just about one family, it's about a system that let it happen, about the quiet places in America where darkness still lives unchallenged. They lived in a valley so far off the grid that even the census gave up trying. The family called it the Bowl, a natural depression in the land where fog settled like a curse and time refused to move forward. Outsiders didn't come here. The family liked it that way. They said the world was evil, that cities were made of lies, and that blood was the only thing you could trust. James and Mary Alice were raised under that belief. Their father, Arlen H., was a stern, God-fearing man who quoted scripture with a loaded shotgun across his lap. He taught his children that the family must never mix with the poisoned outside. His version of the Bible had underlined verses, phrases like, "The seed of thy brother shall not be spilled in vain." Twisted interpretations carved into the minds of children too afraid to question. There were 11 children originally, James and Mary Alice, just 2 of them. But by the 1960s, most were gone. 2 died in infancy. 1 girl ran into the woods and never came back. The others? Some say they moved away, but when investigators later searched the property, they found bones behind the smokehouse. Small, human, unmarked. By the time Mary Alice turned 16, she was the only girl left. James was already broken by then, not cruel, not violent, but hollowed out, like something human had been scooped out of him in childhood. They were kept home from school, taught only by their father, who preached that the world was a test, and their family, chosen. Their mother died when Mary Alice was 13. After that, the house changed. It got quieter, colder. Meals became scarcer. James stopped speaking for days at a time. Mary Alice began sleeping in the same room as her brother, not out of desire, but because she was afraid, not of him, but of what was outside, of being alone. The first pregnancy was not hidden. Arlen called it blessed. He told them it was their duty to keep the bloodline pure. When the baby was born with twisted feet and a face that wouldn't stop twitching, Arlen said it was a test of faith. That was the moment Mary Alice started to break, but no one noticed. No one came. The child didn't cry for the first 2 days. When he finally did, it was a sound like metal scraping against itself. Eli wasn't the only one. Over the next 11 years, Mary Alice gave birth to 6 more children, all of them fathered by James, none of them normal. There was Ruthie, born without eyes. They sewed buttons into her baby cap so the neighbors wouldn't ask questions, though there were no neighbors left who dared knock. Then came Samuel, who never learned to speak, only shrieked when the wind got too loud. By the time child number 5 arrived, even Arlen stopped pretending this was holy. He took to drinking in the woods, muttering to trees and digging shallow pits at night. Some of those pits were later found with animal bones. Some weren't. The state finally took notice in 1982 when an anonymous letter was sent from a post office 30 miles out. No one ever claimed to have written it. It simply read, "There are children being born in the dark. Help them." Social workers drove in, but the first time they tried to reach the house, their vehicle broke down 2 miles from the property. Locals said it was the land rejecting them. Mechanics blamed rusted parts and bad luck. They didn't try again for 3 more years. When they finally did, what they found was described as inhuman. The house had no working plumbing. Windows were boarded shut, not with glass, but plastic wrap and duct tape. There was no furniture. The children slept on matted piles of clothing. The smell of mildew and urine was unbearable, but it was the children themselves that stopped the investigators cold. They couldn't speak, not just from trauma, but from a lifetime of malformed cognition. Their faces were sunken, their spines curled in unnatural ways, their skin pale and marked by lesions. One child, David, had fused toes. Another didn't respond to sound at all. All of them were underweight. All of them stared like animals, afraid, but unblinking. Mary Alice sat in the corner that day, brushing a doll's hair with a fork. She didn't look up when they entered. She didn't answer questions. She just whispered, "They're mine. I kept them safe. I did what Daddy said." James wasn't there. He had vanished months earlier. Some say he drowned in the quarry after walking into it one night, never resurfacing. Others believe he never left the valley, that he watches from the trees, waiting. Next section. The state removed all 7 children, quietly. No press, no headlines, just black government vans in the middle of the night. Locals were told it was a welfare intervention. But rumors spread faster than facts. Within a week, people started calling them the children of sin. Whispers turned to fear. Kids at the local school told stories about a girl with no mouth who screamed without opening her lips, about a boy who crawled backwards, about a name you weren't supposed to say, because if you said it 3 times, you'd dream of that house, and if you dreamed of it, you'd never wake up the same. The children were placed in separate institutions across the state. No family would take them in. Too many health issues, too much strangeness. Some were misdiagnosed with rare genetic syndromes, others were labeled feral. None of them lasted long in one place. One child, Joseph, was found outside his facility at 3 in the morning, just standing in the rain. No clothes, no shoes, just staring up at the sky like he was waiting for something to come down and take him back. Mary Alice, meanwhile, was institutionalized. Her diagnosis read like a textbook of generational collapse: schizotypal disorder, dissociative fugue, severe PTSD, borderline intellectual function. But the truth was simpler. She had never known any other way to live. She didn't see what had happened as wrong. She had no concept of wrong. When a nurse asked her once, "Why did you stay?" she looked confused and answered, "Where would I go?" And yet, despite everything, despite the malformations, the mental collapse, the isolation, 2 of the children did survive into adulthood. Not well, not easily, but they lived. One was Ruthie, the girl with no eyes. She's still alive today, in a care facility under a different name. She doesn't speak, but she hums the same melody over and over. No one knows where it's from. The other was David. His records were sealed, and the state won't confirm his location. But in 2011, a man claiming to be him posted to an online genealogy forum. The post read, I'm trying to find out who I am. I was born in a house without mirrors. My mother said my uncle was my father. I don't know what to believe. If you know the name Mary Alice, please message me." And then, silence. If you're still watching, they tried to erase her. That's how these stories usually end. Not with justice, not with truth, but with silence. Mary Alice died in 2003. There was no funeral, no obituary. Her body was cremated, her ashes reportedly scattered near the hollow where the house once stood. The building itself had burned down years earlier, some say by accident, others by intention. One of the surviving social workers called it a mercy, said that land should never have held a home to begin with. But the silence didn't last. In 2007, a journalist named Hal R. stumbled upon a box in a county archive labeled Property Violation 1985. Inside were photographs brittle with age. 7 children, eyes blurred out by marker. A woman hunched in the corner, staring directly into the camera. And one image, partially burned, of a man believed to be James. His face was obscured, but his arms were wrapped around an infant. Written on the back in block letters, Eli, 1971. Hal tried to publish the story. He was warned off, quietly, professionally. He told friends later that someone from the state called him directly and said, "You don't want to drag this up. There are still people living who carry that blood. Let it die." But it didn't die. The internet doesn't forget. Threads began appearing, people claiming to be distant cousins, others swearing they had heard the name Mary Alice whispered in their childhood homes. One user from Ohio described seeing a child who looked like David in the late 1990s, thin, slow-moving, barefoot in winter. Another claimed their grandfather had worked for child services in the 80s and quit after seeing what was in that house. No details, just the word unnatural. And what does unnatural mean? We use it to push away things we can't make sense of. But Mary Alice's story isn't about monsters. It's about what happens when we let families rot in silence, when we let cycles repeat because they're buried too far out of sight to confront. There was no evil spirit in that home, no demonic force whispering commands, just a man who twisted scripture, a world that turned its back, and a girl who never knew there was any other kind of love. Today, the valley is empty. The trees have grown thick over the path, as if nature itself is trying to smother the memory. Locals call it cursed, say even animals avoid the place. Hunters tell stories about hearing children crying in the woods, though no children have lived there in decades. Hikers who wander too close report the same thing, an overwhelming sense of being watched, and a silence so complete it feels like the air is listening. But the real curse isn't supernatural, it's historical, psychological, generational. You see, what happened to Mary Alice wasn't the result of one choice. It was the product of many people choosing not to act. A community that looked away, a system that failed to intervene, a culture that taught obedience over escape. Because the truth is, there are more families like hers. Maybe not as extreme, maybe not with 7 children born of a brother, but the core of it. Repeating trauma, isolation, control masked as tradition, and the desperate, terrifying power of blood when it becomes the only thing you're allowed to trust. There's a phrase in Appalachian communities, "Keep it in the family." It was said with pride once, a way to protect what was yours, to keep outsiders from taking what you built. But for some families that phrase became something darker, a code, a trap, a prison passed down like a surname. And now we're left with a story almost too painful to hold. A girl born into a collapsing bloodline, a brother raised to believe he had no choice, children who never asked to be born into a legacy of silence, and a house long since burned where the echoes haven't yet faded. We tell stories like these not to frighten, but to remember, to remind ourselves that not all horror lives in the shadows. Sometimes it lives under our own names, passed down in whispers, in old photographs, in the shaking hands of those too afraid to tell the truth until it's far too late. Somewhere out there, one of them may still be alive, walking quietly among us, carrying the weight of a name that never should have been whispered beyond that hollow. You weren't supposed to know this story, but now you do. There's one last thing, one detail buried so deep in the records it was almost lost. In 1999, a nurse at a long-term care facility documented a conversation with Mary Alice during one of her rare moments of lucidity. She had been sitting by the window, humming that same low tune Ruthie would later be known for, off-key, untraceable, almost like a lullaby from another world. The nurse asked her gently, "Do you remember the names of your children?" Mary Alice didn't respond at first. She just stared through the glass, her reflection warped by the rain outside. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "They weren't mine. Not really. They belong to the house." The nurse pressed further. "Which house?" Mary Alice blinked, as if waking from a long sleep. "The one without mirrors. The one where God walked backward." That sentence became a haunting inside the nurse's mind. She later wrote in a private journal, "She wasn't speaking metaphorically. I believe she truly thought that place bent reality, that right and wrong didn't work the same inside those walls." The state sealed her files a year later, medical records gone, institutional logs wiped. It's as if she never existed. The children, too, scattered, renamed, some dead, some perhaps still hidden in care homes under other identities. The bloodline may have ended, or it may not have. There's no certainty, and that's what keeps this story alive. Uncertainty. The idea that somewhere, someone still carries it forward, unknowing, unwilling, haunted not by choice, but by inheritance. We often like to believe the past is behind us, that we've moved forward, progressed, evolved. But sometimes history doesn't die, it just goes quiet. It waits, and in certain places, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the hum of Mary Alice's lullaby, in a field overgrown with weeds, in a home long erased from property me. APS. In the nervous stories told at night by people who swear they saw something they weren't supposed to see. You found this story for a reason. Maybe curiosity led you here, maybe something darker, but now that you've heard it, you carry it too, and some stories, once heard, never leave you. End.